And so we have so then we have the same idea again, that the meeting of the mind consciousness, mind and ideas is called contact. Not entirely clear what the distinction is between all these things, because they are sort of closely related to each other, but the general idea is the object which senses, and then the object that is sensed, and then the consciousness. The meeting of the three is contact, or if you like, it is experience. And from that experience there is feeling, and what you feel you perceive. Yeah, you make sense of the world somehow. That's what perception is about. A certain way of understanding the world. What you perceive, you think about. I didn't really say maybe enough about this particular point here, that what you perceive, you think about, because it is an important point. And if you understand this, you understand a little bit about why the development of perception matters so enormously, and why this is talked about by the Buddha so much. And one of the things that you will see with your thinking mind is that your thinking mind will, sometimes you will have positive thoughts, sometimes you will have negative thoughts. And one of the way of dividing the thinking mind is into wholesome and unwholesome thoughts, right? That's what I meant about positive and negative thoughts. This is a very important division of the world of thought, or the world of ideas, because we're trying to cultivate the wholesome and overcome the unwholesome. Yeah? So one very important way of classifying thought is into unwholesome thoughts and wholesome thoughts. And this is what you find in the next sutta after this one, called the Dveda Vitakka Sutta, the two kinds of thoughts. The Buddha talks specifically about what he did before his awakening, which was dividing the world, or his world, or experience, into two kinds of thoughts. Yeah, so you know what that means, right? So sometimes your thoughts are like not super nice. Other times they are nice, depending on the certain situation, the circumstances. But what is interesting here, this gives you an idea why that is happening. Yeah? This here points to what is going on in your thinking mind, why it is sometimes that your thoughts are wholesome, why at other times they are unwholesome. And the reason is perception. It is a perception that lies behind your thinking mind. And this is kind of fascinating. If you have a lot of mindfulness after you come out of meditation or whatever, and you look at the process of thinking, and you ask yourself, well, why is it I'm thinking like this? Why am I feeling this way? Why am I thinking a negative thought? Why am I thinking a positive thought? Right? Let's say it's a person that you're thinking about, and one time it may be the same person, and you feel kindness toward. Another time you may feel a bit of negativity towards the same person, right? You know what the mind is like. It changes very easily like this. And now if you look at that process of thinking, you will see that behind that thought is a perception. It is some idea of that person, a way of experience that person that lies behind that thought. And so if we develop the perception in the right way, the thinking will fall in line with the perception. So the idea here is that, when you perceive the person in a certain way, you think of them as an enemy. You perceive them differently, you think of them as a friend. You perceive them in one way, you think of them as bad, they've done something bad towards you. Other way, they've done something kind towards you. And then the whole process of thinking aligns with that way of perceiving the person. So this becomes very useful then to understand the whole kind of how we can deal with the process of thinking in a way that actually is useful and helpful and aligns the mind with the Dhamma. So perception underlies these things. So developing perception then becomes very important. So we always perceive people in a way that is useful, either through compassion or through metta. These are really the two ways we want to perceive other people, not in a way that leads to ill will or whatever. So again, the idea, the importance of perception as an underlying quality of the mind. The thinking then comes about from that, and what you think about, you proliferate, you papancha, the nice word papancha, right? Papancha sounds a bit like you kind of thinking nonsense, doesn't it? Papancha sounds a bit dodgy right there. It's kind of a nice word. So this, what do you call these words that where they sound like what they mean? Onomatopoetica or something like that. remember now, something like that. So they sound like what they are, and that's kind of what they how it works. I don't know if you in Bahasa Indonesia, you have the the word for garbage or for rubbish. Sampah, right? Sampah, and of course that is the same word. I remember a few years ago I was here in Indonesia. I was traveling with this group, this Indonesian Buddhist society, and we were talking about one of the bad words of speech, and I said, "Oh, it's sampah palapa," and they said, "What? Sampah plus sampah? That means rubbish," and they were all laughing in the hall because sampah palapa means like nonsensical talk, right? Stupid talk, ridiculous. And so in Indonesian it means rubbish, so it's rubbish talk. It's kind of nice. So that's the sampah for you. Sampah sounds a bit, if you say sampah palapa, it doesn't sound like you're saying anything very serious, right? It's sampah palapa. It sounds a bit dodgy right away here. This is one of those older words that have that kind of feeling about them. Sometimes the word feel like what they mean, which is interesting. I'm not sure if that is, if there's anything going on there, but anyway, whatever. So you proliferate, and what you proliferate is the source by which notions and driven by proliferating perceptions beset the person. This occurs with respect to ideas known by the mind, past, future, and present. So this leads to all kinds of problems because of the proliferation in this way. So this is really the most important part of the sutta that I have read out so far, and the one that I really wanted to point out, because this kind of gives the background for the development of perceptions and why that is so important. But I will finish it off because it is nice to see the rest as well. So sometimes I just like the extracts of the sutta, but sometimes it's nice to take the whole sutta to really get a feeling for how the Buddha speaks and how these monks speak. So then the Venerable Mahakaccana says, when there is the eye sights and eye consciousness, it will be possible to discover evidence of contact. When there is evidence of contact, it is possible to discover evidence of feeling. When there is evidence of feeling, it is possible to discover evidence of perception. When there is evidence of perception, it will be possible to discover evidence of thought. When there is evidence of thought, it will be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. So in other words, when we experience the world through the eye or through the other senses, then this process kind of happens. This is the nature of this process. In fact, this here is not entirely complete. This shows the process for an ordinary person, right? But for a person, for example, who is practicing, it will start to limit down. It will start to change a little bit. The proliferation will not be as bad as it used to be. Why? Because we are practicing precepts, we are practicing certain degrees of restraint, we're learning to use the mind in a good way, so it will kind of narrow down a little bit. It will not be as bad as it was before. That's already quite a useful thing, right? You don't allow the proliferation to take certain forms, which are very detrimental. And then as you keep on developing, maybe one day you have some very profound insight into the Dhamma, you become a stream enterer or whatever, and then the mind will automatically train towards not following it, not allowing the proliferation to happen. The mind is automatically practicing for the ending of craving, because you have understood the problem of the what is called the Sakkaya Ditthi. It's one of the factors you have overcome as a stream enterer. Sakkaya Ditthi means the view that there is a personal identity inside. You've given up that view. And so the mind is now leaning in a different direction already, training in the right way here. And eventually, when you become an arahant, actually you don't have these thoughts anymore. The proliferation stops, because the proliferation is based on the idea of I. And when the I is gone, that's not this I, but the I person, the I am, etc. When that I has disappeared, then of course the proliferation must also stop. So this, what we're seeing here, is really the ordinary person, or maybe the normal ones, but not the arahants. The arahants don't have this this issue anymore with proliferation. So then it goes on with the same, all the other five senses. When there's the ear, the nose, the tongue, the body, and the mind, and ideas and consciousness, it will be possible to discover evidence of contact. When there is evidence of contact, it will be possible to discover evidence of feeling. When there's evidence of feeling, it will be possible to discover evidence of perception. When there's evidence of perception, it will be possible to discover evidence of thinking. When there's evidence of thinking, it will be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. Yes? Yes, good, good. Good. Okay. So then we have the reverse, yeah? When there is no I, no sight, no consciousness, no I consciousness, it would not be possible to discover evidence of contact. When there's no evidence of contact, it would not be possible to discover evidence of feeling. When there's no evidence of feeling, it would not be possible to discover evidence of perception. When there's no evidence of perception, it will not be possible to discover evidence of thinking. When there's no evidence of thinking, it will not be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. So giving up the I, and sights, that is a way of overcoming all these proliferations. So it's kind of a radical cure to the problem, giving up the I. But as I mentioned before, it doesn't really, that is not where it starts. It starts by having insight and giving up the sense of I am, etc. That's actually where it starts. And this is kind of the final thing that happens ultimately. When everything is given up, everything is abandoned. When there is no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no ideas, and no mind consciousness, it will not be possible to discover evidence of contact. When there's no evidence of contact, it will not be possible to discover evidence of feeling. When there's no evidence of feeling, it will not be possible to discover evidence of perception. When there's no evidence of perception, it will not be possible to discover evidence of thinking. When there's no evidence of thinking, it will not be possible to discover evidence of being beset by judgments driven by proliferating perceptions. So that is the understanding of Mahakachana. This is how I understand the detailed meaning of that brief passage for recitation given by the Buddha. If you wish, you may go to the Buddha and ask him about this. You should remember it in line with the Buddha's answer now. So, so the main point of this whole passage that I want to kind of bring out is the importance of perception in there and how that perception can be developed and changed by how we attend to the world. Yeah, how we attend to the world is really critical here. And if you attend to the world in a certain way, then those perceptions will be right. They will not be proliferating. They will not be carrying on all these kind of stupid ways. So we learn how to attend in the right way to the world. And we learn this by perceiving the world in a certain way, basically by having right view about things and aligning our thoughts and perceptions in accordance with the right view. And as we do that, we start to see things differently, and things become less proliferating, And when they're less proliferating, we become more peaceful, right? Because the proliferation of the mind is this endless moving on, endless agitation, endless searching for something which doesn't exist. That is kind of the problem with our lives. This idea of searching for something which doesn't exist. This is what is really problematic with our existence. And there's a nice saying with Ajahn Chah, Ajahn Brahm's teacher, maybe the most famous meditation master in Thailand in the 20th century. He said that life is a bit like searching for a tortoise with a mustache. Tortoises don't have mustaches. If you look for something which doesn't exist, you're going to keep on looking until eternity, and you can keep on looking. And as you are looking for something which doesn't exist, you suffer. That is kind of our existence. So we're always looking for things that don't exist. And this is kind of the problem. This is the search. When we stop gradually, as we change our perceptions, we change our views, we understand how the Buddha is teaching about the world, it means that we stop looking in the wrong place. Actually, we look far less, because the very process of looking is part of the problem. And this is kind of the weird thing, because we are so used to everything being about looking in the world, moving towards something. That process itself is agitating and problematic. And it's when you stop looking, when you just sit back and relax, and you go into nice meditation, that is actually where you find true peace and true freedom in a certain way. So it's kind of weird. It's kind of reverse what we normally expect in the world. But it all happens and comes out of the development of these perceptions. All right. So then he said you should go to the Buddha and ask him to see what happens next in the sutta. Then those mendicants, approving and agreeing with what Venerable Mahakaccana said, rose from their seats and went to the Buddha, bowed, sat down to one side, and told him what had happened, adding in, Mahakaccana clearly explained the meaning to us in this manner, with these words and phrases. And then the Buddha replies, Mahakaccana is astute, mendicants. He has great wisdom. If you came to me and asked this question, I would answer it in exactly the same way as Mahakaccana. That is what it means, and that's how you should remember it. Okay, time to stop again. All right. Oh. So here we are. There's always technical difficulties in every retreat, so this is nothing unusual. So just that's how it is. So you can see here the master and the student are agreeing with each other. This is one of the things I always like to do with Ajahn Brahm. I listen to what Ajahn Brahm says, and then I read the suttas and I see if it matches. And if it doesn't match, I go to Ajahn Brahm and says, the Buddha says this, but you say this. Who is right? Now, clear these things up for me, please. And ready already? Wow, okay, excellent. Yeah, change the batteries, okay.
But it's not on yet.
Not on yet, okay. Okay, the technical team here is very efficient. That's good then. But actually, it is very important, that this is the case, that what we teach, it should align with the word of the Buddha. It really matters, and if it doesn't, then we have to ask questions. And I don't make any excuses. But I feel it's my kind of almost job as a disciple of Ajahn Brahm to ask these questions. If I don't, I'm not doing my job. That's what I feel like. I feel kind of, we have to have answers to these things. And I don't ask these kind of questions much anymore, but in the beginning, when I was a young monk, I was a real nuisance for Ajahn Brahm. I can imagine. I really kind of, at tea time, I would kind of come up, and as soon as he saw me, you can see him kind of his face looked not so happy because he knew here the arguments are coming. But it is important. And of course, one of the things that you do discover, ideally, if you have a good teacher, that it does actually align, is largely with the way the Buddha says. The most important points agree here. So when this was said, Venerable Ananda said to the Buddha, Sir, suppose a person who was weak with hunger was to obtain a honey cake. Wherever they tasted, they would enjoy the sweet, delicious flavor. In the same way, wherever a sincere, capable mendicant might examine with wisdom the meaning of this exposition of the teaching, they will only gain joy and clarity. Sir, what is the name of this exposition of the teaching? Well then, Ananda, you may remember this exposition of the teaching as the honey cake discourse. That's how it became the honey cake discourse, because it was a sweet discourse. This is what the Buddha said. Satisfied, Venerable Ananda was happy with what the Buddha said. So, this is how the suttas usually end. Yeah, the monks or whoever was there, they were happy with what the Buddha said. But does it always end in this way? I would test your knowledge of the suttas. Does it every sutta end in this way, or are there exceptions to this? There are exceptions? Wow, okay. Which one is? Do you know which one it is now? Yeah.
Then they kept arguing and they just walked away.
Okay. Okay, I'm not sure exactly which one you're talking about, but the one I know, which is the first one in the Majjhima Nikaya, which is the Buddha Pariyasa, the root of all things, which is so profound, and the monks had wrong view. So it's a little bit like you were saying, actually, they were kind of arguing, and then the Buddha kind of pointed out their wrong views, and they weren't too happy with that, so they were kind of disappointed afterwards, and they did not enjoy what the Buddha said. They were not satisfied, which is fascinating. Yeah, I think they were Brahmins, and Brahmins, they had a different view of reality than the Buddhists had. So anyway, so that is the first sutta, the Honeybowl Sutta. And what I will do now is I will continue in the same vein. We'll move on to the next sutta. Oh, I can't remember which suttas I have. Anyway. That's okay. I thought there was another sutta there, but it's not. Oh, there it is on the sutta there. Okay, right. Okay, so the next one is called the diversity of perceptions. And this particular sutta is in the Dhatu Samyutta. Dhatu is a word in Pali which means something like element, perhaps. Yeah, so Dhatu is in the connected discourse is on elements. The word Dhatu is also found in the word in Sri Lanka. They have the something called the Dagava. Have you heard about the Dagavas before in Sri Lanka? It's like stup. It's a word for stupa in Sri Lankans. And the Dagava is a short form for Dhatu Garbha. Yeah, Dhatu is this Dhatu you have here, like an element, and Garbha is like a chamber or a room. So it's a room for elements, an element room. But the Dhatu also means like the elements of the Buddha. So the relics of the Buddha are called Dhatus as well, because they're like the elements remaining from the Buddha. So they're like the room of Buddha relics, yeah, the Dagava. So next time you go to Sri Lanka, you can give the Sri Lankans this explanation of what the word Dagava means. They might say, wow, you're really well educated in Singapore, they might say. So has anyone here been to Sri Lanka before? Been to Sri Lanka? Yes, I've been to Sri Lanka. Okay, yeah. It's very quite inspiring. You have this a very ancient Buddhist culture in Sri Lanka, and it's quite nice to go and see some of these great monuments and stupas and what have you. And one of my, some of these monasteries in Sri Lanka, they're cave monasteries, or more like maybe overhang monasteries, like a rock overhang. Yeah, and then you build the kuti kind of base of that rock overhang. And sometimes these rock overhang kutis, they have like inscriptions on them. It has inscriptions that are often in Pali or in ancient Sinhala. And they say things like here, the monk so-and-so dwelt here, and these inscriptions are 1,500, 2,000 years old, right? So you have this feeling of continuity of the Dhamma, you have people practicing for so long. And one of my monastic friends, Ajahn Brahmali, who is now the city monk in Newbury in Melbourne, he stayed in one of these kind of rock overhang monasteries in Sri Lanka. I went to see his kuti once. It's really kind of cool to go there and see these things. You get this feeling of continuity, maybe in some ways more there than in India, because in Sri Lanka it has been continuous. It's always been kind of available. So this is the idea of the word dhatu. But the word dhatu is quite diverse in meaning. Element is one meaning. But for example, you have also things like the dhatu of cessation. Yeah. And so element of cessation, well, element, when we talk about element in English, usually it means like something physical, yeah? And cessation is not really anything physical. So another translation of the word dhatu would be something like property, the property of cessation, the property of ending, the property of things like relinquishment, or the property of nibbana. Nibbana is more like a property than a thing, the property of renunciation, for example. All of these things are part of this as well. So it's a very broad kind of idea. It's like existing qualities, dhatus in this world. So this is a whole series of suttas on these existing qualities called dhatus. That's why it's called the diversity of perception, coming from the diversity of elements we'll see in a second. So, mendicants, diversity of elements, or properties or whatever, give rise to diversity of perceptions. Diversity of perceptions give rise to diversity of thought. Yeah, we've just seen this before. Diversity of thought give rise to diversity of desires. Diversity of desires give rise to diversity of passions. Diversity of passions give rise to diversity of searches. And what is the diversity of elements? The sight element, the sound element, the smell element, the taste element, the touch element, and the idea element. This is called the diversity of elements. So this is one way of defining the diversity of elements. So because these things exist in the world, these elements, these six senses, they exist, then perception arises in relation to each one of these senses, right? These elements. And this is exactly what we saw before. This is just an expanding or slightly different way of thinking about the same thing here. And because you have these perceptions, well, you will think about them. This is natural. So again, the perceptions underlie the thought. So if we can do something with the perceptions, then we can do something with the thinking mind. This closeness of perception and thought is very important. In fact, we will see later on that views as well are part of this. The mental world is sometimes divided into three aspects: perception, thoughts, and views. And we can kind of work any of these three, and then we can change the kind of the way our mind works as a consequence. And then, but here it goes on to thoughts, then give rise to desires. We think about these perceptions, and you can imagine when you perceive things, we kind of make judgments about them. This is what we think about them. You walk past a shop, and in the shop window there's some nice pastries or whatever. I don't know what you like, maybe some nice noodles. I'm not sure what Singaporeans prefer. Whatever it is, you see something in the shop window, and then you think about it. Okay, you mean, oh, actually I'm full. When you're full already, you're not so interested in food, so it's all right. Sometimes you're hungry and you walk past and you think about this. You don't have to think very much. The perception of desire arises pretty quickly sometimes. So we kind of divide the world and we judge the world, and then desires arise in all of these realms according to our thoughts and the way we think about that world. And then when you desire, passion arises. I can't remember now what the word for passion is here, maybe raga. This is like a strengthening of desire. And then we start searching. Searching here just means that we are looking for satisfaction, satisfying those desires in one way or another. That's really what it refers to. And this is why we are so busy all the time, because we're always searching. Everything in our life is kind of a search for satisfaction, satisfying our desires. Almost everything we do, all the movement, this is why you are here on this retreat. Is that right? You come here to find some satisfaction, right? In one way or another. It is true. And maybe now you're kind of heading in the right direction. But a lot of the time we're not. We're just searching and searching blindly without any real understanding of what we are doing. And that is a big part of the problem. So we search, and then we search, and then we search, and then we search, and then we die. And then we start searching again. Searching, 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 and then die. And this is why this kind of thing just goes on and on and on and on and on forever. We're searching, but never really finding any solution. So we just end up dying, and then we carry on doing it again, and then again, and again, and again. And after a while, you think, okay, enough of this. Why on earth am I doing this? Let's find the real search. Let's find some real solutions to this problem. This is crazy what we're doing here. So these are called the diversity of elements. And how does diversity of elements give rise to diversity of perception? And diversity of perception give rise to diversity of thought. And diversity of thought give rise to diversity of desires. And diversity of desire give rise to diversity of passion. And diversity of passion give rise to diversity of searches. So what I'm going to do now, because I think it is really, really important to know the Pali here. Do you agree with that? So yeah, wow. Wonderful. I'm really glad you're saying that, actually. That's very, very impressive. So I want to know the Pali of this word called passion here, because I don't know. Do you know it already? Kim, are you here? Usually you know things before I know them, so you are here. Saying rubbish. Okay, yeah, okay. Don't say rubbish, please. So, chanda is the word here. Parilaha. Parilaha is the word, okay. Parilaha means almost like fever. Yeah, that's what it means. So the fever, so you have, once you have the desire, a fever arises in you. It's like the sensual fever, the thing that drives you to act, yeah, to make things happen. It has ordinary desire may not be enough, but when it becomes really feverish in the mind, then it becomes important. Then it kind of drives you to do things. So desires can be very strong in this way. So fever is a nice word there, which describes this quite well there. Okay, so then the Buddha says, the sight element gives rise to perception of sight. The perception of sight gives rise to thoughts about sights. Doesn't really explain it. Thoughts about sight give rise to desire for sight. The desire for sights gives to passion for sight. The passion for sight gives rise to searching for sights. Okay. Okay. I'm not sure if this adds very much to the previous explanation, but never mind. This just says the same thing in slightly different wording, yeah. And that is how this whole thing comes about. Yeah. All right. But again, I think one of the important points of all of this is that the root thing that we can do something with here is perceptions. Yeah, it starts off with perceptions. That is kind of the root mental attitude, if you like, to the world, because that is at the root. That is what we have to deal with. The element itself, we can't do anything with, because the element is something which is there, right? The element of seeing, you can't just eliminate seeing. Well, actually you can, but that's kind of further down the track. Yeah. Initially you have to deal with the perceptions, and then eventually everything else will fade away. Yeah. So perception here again is a very foundational thing, yeah, and that is why it is what we have to work with on this path, and again shows the importance of dealing with perceptions. Let's go on to the next one. Next one is called extinguishment, which is a translation for Nibbana. This is found in the Numerical Discourses, the 4, number 179. And so here we have this sutta, this found in various forms in different places, but here we have Venerable Ananda and Venerable Sariputta. Then Venerable Ananda went up to Venerable Sariputta and exchanged greetings with him. When the greetings and polite conversation were over, Ananda sat down to one side and said to Sariputta, "What is the cause, Reverend Sariputta? What is the reason why some sentient beings aren't fully extinguished in the present life?" This is a very interesting question, right? Extinguished here means that they haven't reached Nibbana. So why is it that some beings don't reach Nibbana? Kind of useful thing to know, isn't it? So if if we can figure this out, then you will know whether you are going to reach Nibbana or not, or any one of us is going to reach Nibbana through this idea. It's a very nice way of phrasing things. Yeah, what are the causes that lead to some people reaching Nibbana, others not? How does this happen then? So this is kind of really exciting. When you see these kind of things, I get really excited then, because this is kind of like uncovering a secret, right? These are like the secret of samsaric existence, some of the root things that block us from achieving the deeper aspects of the path. And it's very easy when you see something like this, which actually on the surface look very interesting, and to read it too fast and not really consider it properly. Yeah, because if you consider these things properly, because very often when you read it, you think, oh yeah, well, you know, that wasn't all that interesting after all. But actually it is interesting. Yeah, there's going to be information here that is very profound and actually very interesting. So it needs a lot of attention to what is going to happen in this sutta, to actually consider it carefully and not pass over it too quickly. Yeah. So I'm just setting things up now so that you are, you know, when we come to this now, you are ready to listen to what's going on there. I need to be ready too, by the way. I'm doing this also for myself. This is one of the great things about being allowed to teach, is that you also have a lot of benefit as a consequence. So thank you for coming on this retreat. So this is what Venerable Sariputta says. Remember, Venerable Sariputta is the Buddha's right-hand monk. Yeah, if you ever see like the iconography is like the paintings of the sculptures of the disciples. And if you see that, you always see Venerable Sariputta should be on the right-hand side of the Buddha. Yes, on this side of the Buddha, when the Mahamoggallana on the other side. And so I often say this to people: the way to recognize Venerable Sariputta is that he has attitude. Yeah. So all the other disciples, they have their hands in Anjali. Yeah. So there's kind of very bland, no attitude. Everyone is the same. There's like kind of uniformity. Yeah. Venerable Sariputta is the only one who does not have his hand in Anjali. That's how you know. So what does he look like? He looks like this. It's true. That's almost exactly what he looks like. Yeah, he looks like he has attitude. Yeah, so I'm gonna explain it. But actually, when you see him, Venerable Sariputta in the suttas, and the more you kind of get to know him, his personality, he's actually an incredibly kind and gentle person. He doesn't have attitude in a bad way, in a very, very positive way. He's a very beautiful and humble monk. Very inspiring when you read about him. So anyway, he's the Buddha's right-hand man, and the Buddha said, if anyone should carry on the teachings if I pass away, if everyone should keep on rolling the wheel of the Dhamma, it is Venerable Sariputta who should do so. Yeah, because he is has the wisdom that is similar to that, close to that of the Buddha. And so then he says, Reverend Ananda, it is because some sentient beings don't really understand which perceptions make things worse, which perception keep things steady, which lead to distinction, and which perceptions lead to penetration of the truth, yeah, penetrating the veil of darkness. That is the cause. That is the reason why some sentient beings aren't fully extinguished in the present life. So this is the problem, right? We need to understand what perceptions are bad and what perceptions are good. That's essentially what this is about. And so when the Buddha talks in the Dveda Vitakka Sutta that I mentioned before, Majjhima 19, about dividing the thinking into two parts, the same is true of perceptions. Dividing perception into two parts. The good ones that lead to improvement and eventual full understanding of the Dhamma, and the bad ones that lead us away from these things. This is what we need to understand. And then the ones that keep things steady. And so this is all we need to do. And then we need to cultivate those perceptions that are positive, and we need to eliminate those perceptions that are bad and lead to decline. Yeah, this is what it is about. So the first thing is to understand the perceptions, what is useful and what is not, and then do the cultivation as a consequence. So now you can start to see why we are doing this little retreat on the development of perception, right? And it's starting to fall into place now. Because if you want to reach the highest part of the Buddhist path, You actually need to understand this. Yeah, so what are the perceptions that need to decline? Well, we know that it's things like ill will and too much desire and attachments and all these kind of things, yeah. The things that keep things steady, this might be when you have success in your meditation and you want to keep it steady, you want to stay there. And you have to make sure you don't kind of give rise to perceptions that are bad. And you keep on understanding that these things you have attained, that they are good and positive, and you keep your mind onto those perceptions that keep things steady. Perceptions that increase are perceptions where you purify your mind. Perceptions of more loving kindness, more compassion, more relinquishment and giving up. All of these kind of things, yeah? Perceiving these things of abandoning, etc. And then eventually the perception of penetration is the perceptions that lead you to understand the Dhamma fully. Yeah? So that's a rough idea of what these things are about, but we'll get into more details about this as we go along. Yeah? And then the Venerable Ananda says, what is the cause, Reverend Sariputta? What is the reason why some sentient beings are fully extinguished in the present life? Reverend Ananda, it is because some sentient beings truly understand which perceptions make things worse, which keep things steady, which perceptions lead to distinction, higher, something higher, which lead to penetration. That is the cause, that is the reason why some sentient beings are fully extinguished, why they reach Nibbana in the present life. So, that is how I justify doing the whole retreat on just developing perceptions. Yeah, I have to kind of create a justification. We have to justify ourselves. This is my justification. So I hope you approve it. And if you don't approve, tough luck. It's going to happen anyway. So that's the way it goes. So yeah, so moving on here fairly rapidly, which is good, because there's always more things to be looked at. The next sutta is called Perversions. And this is from the Numerical Discourses of the Buddha, the 4th chapter on forms, number 49. And the Pali word behind here is vipallasa, is the Pali word. And it means like a distortion of the mind. Yeah, the mind is distorted, not seeing things in the right way. And this is very helpful to help us understand the problems of our perceptions, yeah, where our perceptions go wrong. So again, this provides some of the background for understanding what we should develop and what we should not develop. So here the Buddha says, mendicants, yeah, 𝐵𝑖𝐴𝑘𝐽, there are these 4 distortions of perception, mind, and view. What are the 4? Let us stop there for a second, because right there we have this 3 aspects of perception, mind, and view. This is sanya, is perception, mind is chitta, and view is ditthi. And these are like 3 ways that the mind operates. Perception is like, so what is perception? Perception again is the idea of how we recognize things, how we know what is what, how we perceive the world. Mind here, chitta, is more like thinking about things, yeah, thoughts, like things that kind of come from perception. And then views are like things that are solid ideas about the world, yeah. And so this kind of is a way of looking at all aspects of the mind, yeah, and all the mind overall consists of these 3 kind of aspects: perceptions, thoughts, or perception, mind, and view, or perception, thought. Thought is a perfectly good translation here for chitta, which is here given as mind or thought. And and this is explained quite nicely in the commentary to the sutta, that we start off with the perceptions, and we have seen this already happening now in many places. From that perception, so we start thinking about the world. The thinking is based on certain perceptions, yeah? So we perceive and we think according to our perceptions of the world. And then our views tend to be built up out of our thoughts. Yeah, we think in a certain way, and our thoughts are related to those way of thinking about the world. But the way, and then our views in turn, determine our perceptions. Yeah, because the way our kind of grand ideas of the world, that will inform how we perceive the world. So perception lead to thought, thought lead to views, views lead to perception, which lead to thought, which lead to views, which lead to perception, which lead to thought, views, perception, thought, blah, 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 blah. And it goes on like that. And you can see that this is a kind of a trap, right? It's a kind of a self-perpetuating cycle of mental phenomena and kind of drives itself on. And if this cycle has delusion built into it, and of course that is kind of the point of this whole thing. That's why the sutta is called perversion or distortions. If it has distortion built into it, it means that it's a self-perpetuating cycle of distorted mental states of various kinds, perceptions, thoughts, and views, driving each other on in this particular way here. And so what can we do? And what we can do, of course, is that the escape from this then is the assumption that the Buddha understood the world in the right way. He had overcome these distortions, these delusions about reality. And so then we listen to the Buddha. The Buddha says, this is how the world operates. If you follow this, my ideas, you will gradually overcome this. And that gradual overcoming, the gradual aligning of our thinking with the way the Buddha thought the world, that is what this development of perceptions really is about. And as we develop our perceptions, we are developing our thoughts, and then our views come into line. And so you could say that we are developing, in a sense, all of these things together, because when you develop your perceptions, you have to think about the world, so you're also developing your thoughts. And when you are reading about the views and you're gradually changing your views, you're also changing your views as well. So all of these things are kind of changed together, but the root is the development of perception. And that is how the Buddha talks about this in the suttas. And then gradually the whole thing comes into line with reality, with the way the Buddha saw this. So gradually over time, we change your perceptions around. I have often talked about this in the past, and as the idea of we have this momentum from the past. The momentum is a mental kind of momentum that we have from the past. These are our habits. These are all the ways we have been doing things going back lifetime after lifetime after lifetime. And the very important part of that momentum is the delusions that we have. The delusion that we carry with us from the past. And because that momentum is so strong, it is actually very hard to turn around. Our minds are like super tankers. You know the super tanker, they're always outside of Singapore. You see all those kind of big ocean-going vessels, outside of Singapore, waiting for fuel or whatever it is that they're waiting for there. And when these super tankers, especially the big ones, the ones that can't even get into Singapore because it's so big, there's limits to how large can get into the port of Singapore. These enormous ships that weigh 500,000 tons or whatever, and then they go at full speed, I don't know, 20 knots or something like that, which is really fast for these enormous ships. It takes a long time to turn around. The momentum is so strong, and the weight is so great, and the engine is kind of weak compared to momentum. So gradually, slowly, degree by degree, it turns around. And maybe after 20 kilometers, that ship eventually kind of makes it around and is able to move in a different direction. And so our minds are like little super tankers. We each have our own little super tanker inside. It's kind of heading in a certain direction. Heading towards what? Heading towards dukkha. Always heading towards dukkha. That's our super tanker. It's kind of not a recommended destination. So we want to head towards sukha instead, and to be able to head from dukkha to sukha, dukkha is suffering, towards happiness instead. We have to change the course of our super tanker, stage by stage by stage, gradually. And so we have to keep on at it, reflecting again and again, changing our perceptions again and again, reminding ourselves of these teachings day in, day out. And as we do that, we can start to see the change inside, and we can feel, it feels like we're heading towards more happiness. It's very interesting when this happens, because you know that something has changed inside of you. You can feel that you're attaching less, that you're craving less than you did before, that you have more compassion for people because you look at people in a new way. This is one of the great victories, yeah, in the development of perception. When you look at people around you with compassion almost all the time, even when people, maybe especially when people do bad things, you have compassion for them because you know that that is terrible to do bad things, and they don't know what they're doing. These are some of the battles that we gradually win in our, in our practice of this Noble Eightfold Path. And some of the people are the most terrible in the world. Some of the people who seem the most dangerous. And sometimes you can have the compassion for them too, because you realize they have no idea what they're doing. So you move around, you change the direction of your supertanker. This is really what this is about, the idea of developing our perceptions and views and thoughts. And the whole mind gradually comes around. So what are these distortions that we're talking about? And here they are, taking impermanence as permanence, taking suffering as happiness, taking not self as self, taking ugliness as beauty. These are the four perversions of perceptions, mind, and view. Yeah, so these are the four problems. These are the three characteristics plus one, that is taking ugliness as beauty, is the fourth one here. So this is gives you an idea of how our minds are distorted, right? This gives an idea of, these are called the three characteristics, the tilakkhana in Pali, and this gives an idea of where we have to look. So taking what is impermanent as permanent. Yeah, so we have a tendency to see permanence where there is no permanence. We have a tendency to think that things are stable when actually they are not stable. And so this is a very important part of this idea of the problem of the world. In fact, this first one is probably the most important one of all. And you remember the last words of the Buddha when he's about to die. He says, "Vaya Dhamma Sankhara apamadena sampadeta." Yeah, Vaya Dhamma Sankhara, which means all things have the nature to disappear or to come to an end. Apamadena sampadeta, strive on with heedfulness or carefulness or something like that. Yeah, so act. So that is a summary of the teaching of the Buddha right there. The last words of the Buddha is going to be really, really powerful, right? What are you going to say? The last thing is the greatest spiritual teacher in the recorded human history. The last words of that teacher is kind of significant. Yeah, so it's really worthwhile reflecting on these special words that sometimes come out. This is like a summary of the entire Buddhist teachings, a summary of right view. Vaya Dhamma Sankhara. Vaya means to come to an end. Dhamma means nature, ending nature. Sankhara. Sankhara are all conditioned phenomena, basically all phenomena in the world. All phenomena have a nature to come to an end. Yeah. In other words, they are impermanent, they are unreliable, they are unstable, they are problematic, they are dodgy, yeah, etc., etc. Dodgy is a nice word. And so this is so important. And you know that you make mistakes all the time. Why do we know that? Every time you grieve over something in your life, yeah, it very often means that you have taken something to be more permanent than it actually is. If you go to the doctor, or if you feel sick and you feel, oh no, I'm sick, that means already you have taken something to be more permanent than it actually was. No, you're not supposed to be healthy necessarily, right? Sometimes we get sick. That's the nature of the body. That's the way it is. And if you kind of accept that when it happens without really feeling it's bad, that means you have understood impermanence in a very profound way here. Yeah, this is what I mean. Every time we are disappointed with the world, every time we think the world is going in a way it should not, then we haven't understood impermanence. Every time you read the news and you think, oh no, another war, actually you haven't understood impermanence. Of course there is another war. Human beings, we make war. That's one of our jobs, is to make war. We always make wars, right? We've done that all the way through history, and it's not going to stop anytime soon. This is what we do. Why? Because we're stupid. That's why we do it. We are completely nuts. Why on earth do we want to go around killing each other? It's the most stupid thing we can possibly do. Still, we do it. We don't never learn anything. There's that old saying that those who don't learn from history are doomed to repeat their mistakes, right? It sounds very wise until you understand that no one ever learns from history anyway. So it's kind of it doesn't really help very much, right? We learn, but then we forget very quickly again. And this is kind of the problem of life. And so, this is what it means to understand impermanence. It is almost as if there are all these changes kind of building up under the surface out of sight. Yeah, things are moving and changing. We don't really know what's happening yet. And then these forces, they gather a certain momentum until eventually they erupt out on the surface and the world changes. A bit like a volcano or a earthquake, right? The tension builds up and builds up and builds up until eventually the whole thing goes bang, kind of, you have an earthquake or whatever. That is, earthquake is impermanence big time, built up under the surface. We can't really see what is going on there. So as long as we are surprised by events in the world, things changing, as turn on the news and you think, oh no, why another war? We don't want to go to war. It would be really difficult. Come to Australia. We come to Perth, put another monastery, hide out, put another monastery for a while. Then we have that connection, that is a smart connection to keep, right? So this is the thing about the world. It is so uncertain. We don't know what's going to happen around the corner. We don't know what's going to happen with climate change. We don't know what's going to happen. That lack of knowledge, that uncertainty is the problem. We don't know when we're going to die here. Yeah, this is the thing. We don't know whether there's a cancer in the body right now. Probably there is some cancers in here just waiting to come out. I had a father who had a cancer, a sister who had a cancer. When is it my turn? Now. It's still okay. But you don't know, that's the problem. And so this is the idea of not really grasping the idea of how impermanent the world actually is. And so we need to reflect on this again and again and again. And as we reflect on impermanence, then we start to kind of align our view of the world with the way the world actually is. And that is what we're trying to do now. And there's a beautiful saying by Ajahn Chah. There's something about these great meditation masters. They tend to often say things that are really interesting that we often don't think about. And he said something to the effect that everything teaches us. Everything teaches us. Because whenever you look at the world, and whenever you look at things around you, impermanence is always there. Unreliability is always there around us. Seeing things change, things we don't expect. Every time, always the case. And so notice these things. And as you notice them, don't complain. Don't think, oh no. Instead, remind yourself, this is the teaching of the Buddha, right? And then you gain in wisdom rather than complaining about what is just the way things actually happen to be. All right. So that is the first one of these perversions or distortions of mind. The other one is taking suffering as happiness. Whatever actually is suffering, we think of it as happiness in the world. And so this is a problem. This is kind of a big problem in our life, and no wonder people have so much suffering, because they actually place their bets in the wrong place, and they attach to the wrong kind of things, and they don't pursue happiness, they pursue suffering instead. They think they pursue happiness, but because their minds are distorted, they actually pursue suffering. This is kind of interesting, right? That we pursue the opposite of what we actually want to pursue. And largely, we pursue happiness in the world of the five senses. This is kind of one of the biggest problems. We pursue happiness in the world of relationships and jobs and promotions and status and whatever it is in that world of the five senses. But because it is so unreliable, because of the first one of these, because of impermanence or whatever, that world will always disappoint us, always leads to grief and problems. Why? Because people die, things are impermanent, things change, and eventually we die. That's the kind of the absolutely certain thing. And then, of course, the suffering comes as a consequence. And so you start to look for happiness in a different place. When you start to see the unreliability of everything in the world around us. And that is the place where it lasts. Yeah, the place where actually it has a certain, this is where the Buddha talks about the karma being your heir to your karma. Yeah, the idea of happiness that comes is within rather than comes from without. And so you develop the spiritual qualities within. So this is of course what the spiritual path is all about. The Noble Eightfold Path, including all the kindnesses and compassion and understanding and generosity and wisdom and metta and all of these kind of things. That is where all of that comes in. That is where we start to look for happiness. And ultimately we go beyond the whole caboodle, everything, finish everything. And that is where true happiness is to be found, by ending things. The more things we end, the more happy we are. It's weird. It's the opposite of the world. The world is the more we have, the more we accumulate. Here is more things we give up, the more things we end, the better things happen to be as a consequence. And you know that a little bit from your meditation already. Yeah, the more peaceful you are, it's kind of the less thing is going on. It means many things have ended, and you feel more happy as a consequence. It gives you a bit of insight into that right there. Okay, then we have taken not self as self. So whatever in the world is not self, we think of it as self. So that is always a bad idea, because if you take what is not self as self, it means you're going to be disappointed. Yeah, what happened to me? Me is gone. It's not very nice. And when you disappear like that, then it's dukkha. Because of course, self is something that we attach to. This is kind of the thing that is more dear to us than anything in the world, is ourselves. And that's okay. That's the way it should be. But then things change. Things move around. Things are again impermanent. And so this idea of holding on to a sense of self turns out to be impossible. Yeah, and sometimes it's simple little things, right? You wake up in the morning and you don't feel like yourself. Have you had that feeling ever? Today I feel a bit funny. Is this really me, or is this someone else? Or is it kind of a little bit me, a little bit something else? This is kind of part of that feeling of not really being able to control the idea of self. The self is illusory, and the self makes us try to control things in the world. The self is what attaches, the self is what clings, the self is what amasses things, and all of these things that we attach to and amass, etc., all of that is so uncertain. So the self, the I, is a big, big problem. In fact, it is the root problem of everything else. So this is part of these delusions that we have. And then last thing is taking ugliness as beauty. Yeah, we see ugliness, we see beauty in the world when perhaps it is not as beautiful as we think it is. And one of the problems, of course, one of the classical meditations of Buddhism is the meditation on the body. Yeah, the body, it's, when we look at it from the external, it may look okay. But if you look at it from a different angle, it's not as attractive anymore. And this then reduces our attraction to the body itself. So with a simple exercise in seeing what the body is like, you just take the skin off the body, and that's enough to kind of remind you that it's not kind of as beautiful as it's cracked up to be. It has this more to the body. Beauty is only skin deep, as the saying goes. True, isn't it? It's very, very true now. All right, so now that is the distortions of the mind. But then there are these 4 corrections of perception, mind, and view. What for? Taking the impermanent as impermanent, taking suffering as suffering, taking non-self as non-self, taking ugliness as ugliness. These are the 4 correct perceptions and thought and view, or corrections of perceptions, thought, and view now. So, so this is kind of our job. And if we get these 4 perceptions right, then we're going to head towards extinguishment, as we saw in the previous sutta. So we need to contemplate the nature of life and existence and see things in the right way. We have to be careful with these kind of contemplations. because some of these contemplations like suffering and impermanence and non-self, if we're not careful, it can lead in the wrong direction. Yeah, it can lead to a sense of despair, a sense of depression maybe, or the Buddha says everything is suffering. Oh no, it's all suffering. I didn't know that. And this is the problem, right? It doesn't match our experience of reality. And that is kind of the problem, because our experience of life is actually, there's some suffering and there's some happiness. That's how we often experience life. And the Buddha said it's all suffering, and then we get really confused. What do you mean it's all suffering? Yeah, I experience some happiness. And this is where we have to be careful, because if we take these teachings on board in the wrong way, actually we can lead to kind of problems. And this is, I think, one of the weaknesses in large parts of the Buddhist world, is the way we teach the Dhamma. We teach the Dhamma too often from the point of view of the Buddha. Because these teachings come from the Buddha, right? And he taught certain things in a very profound way. So you have the first noble truth is the noble truth of suffering. Yeah, Janti Pidukkha, Jarat Pidukkha, Marana Pidukkha, Piyehi Vipayoga Dukkha, Piyehi Sampayoga Dukkha, etc. And that is the whole idea of dukkha, ending up with Sankitena Panchupadana Kanda Dukkha. In brief, the 5 aggregates of grasping are dukkha. Yeah, and this is the worldview of the Buddha, but it is not the worldview of ordinary people. It is very difficult for us to understand that. Because sometimes we have happinesses in our lives. Sometimes we feel a bit of joy, right? So how can that be dukkha? What is going on here? And so very often what we need to do is we need to also understand that from an ordinary point of view, actually there is a lot of happiness in life, right? There are things that are positive. You do gain some joys and happiness sometimes. Sometimes we get peaceful in meditation or whatever. And these things are real contentments, real satisfactions. And that is how it looks like from an ordinary person's point of view. And so we should focus more on those things on the Buddhist path, yeah, the joys and happiness of the spiritual path, because there's an enormous amount of joy and happiness on the spiritual path. In fact, there's so much happiness that we have no idea how much happiness there is on the spiritual path. That is the reality. So when the Buddha said that all of this is suffering, it is a worldview that is incredibly difficult to relate to. And if we try to relate to something from the Buddha's way of relating to the world, we won't be able to do it. And because we won't be able to do it, we're going to end up just getting even more deluded as a consequence. So when we look at these things, we have to use them with care, not overdo it. Understand, yeah, what we can do. Okay, so we apply the idea of impermanence in areas that actually work for us. Yeah, we contemplate death a little bit, we contemplate the state of the world a little bit, and then we do the spiritual practice, which leads to happiness and contentment. Yeah, we are kind, we are generous. We do some meditation practice, and that leads us to a stability that gives us resilience. Because when you have an inner source of happiness, you become more resilient in the world to deal with precisely these kind of difficulties. So there is a balance here, right? There is a balance on the one hand, you practice the path. That practicing of the path is what allows more insight, more dealing with the nature of reality, and the things kind of work together in this way. So you have to be wise here. If you find yourself getting depressed because the Buddha's teachings are so depressive, then you know you are kind of out of balance. You're out of tune a little bit. All right. So this is just to remind you of contemplating wisely, not unwisely, making sure your mind is in a good spot and that you're kind of using this in a way that actually helps you in the right way. So everything at the right time and place is important for these things. So we see things as impermanent, we see things as suffering, as non-self, and ugly. This is what this is about. These are the 4 corrections of perceptions, mind and view. Mm. Okay. These next two sutras are also very simple little sutras. I'll just have a quick look at them before we stop for the afternoon. The next one is called to be cultivated and not to be cultivated. So again, there's this idea of what should we focus on, what should we cultivate, what should we develop, what should we acquire, and what should we not. And the Buddha says, I say that there are two ways of acquiring perception, right? Or two kinds of perception. That which you should cultivate and that which you should not cultivate. Yeah, this is what I said before about dividing the world into different aspects, that which we should develop, that which we should not develop. And each of these is a way of acquiring perception. That's what the Buddha said. But why did he say it? You should not cultivate the way of acquiring perception, which causes unskillful qualities to grow while skillful qualities decline. And you should cultivate the way of acquiring perceptions, which causes unskillful qualities to decline and skillful qualities to grow. This is one of the standard ways that the Buddha gave for knowing whether you are on the right track or not. Are you developing your mind in the right way? Are you growing in good qualities and are you declining in bad qualities? That is a very, very useful way of being able to evaluate your progress on the path, right? So in general, you should find that the mindfulness is getting stronger over time. You should find that you feel more gentle as a person. You should find you have more compassion. You have more kindness for the world around you. You should find you have more metta inside of you. You should find you have less anger, less greed, less confusion, less restlessness, right? The good qualities are going up, the bad qualities are going down. And you will notice that certain perceptions, certain ways of viewing the world would lead to the good qualities growing and the bad qualities going down. Yeah, so this is a very kind of incredibly useful way of deciding whether we are on the right track or not. So every now and again, you should ask yourself this question. Yeah, maybe not too often, because it takes time for things to change. So not too often, but occasionally you should do this. So once, every few months or whatever, you ask yourself, is the development going in the right way or not? And then, if things are not going in the right way, and you're not really succeeding in this, and the good qualities are not growing, the bad quality is not going down, then you need to ask yourself some tough questions. Why that is the case? What actually is happening here? And then you can kind of get back on track again as a consequence. This is very, very useful. And sometimes, we need to be honest with ourselves, to be able to see ourselves what we are. We have kind of, the spiritual path is so important that it is more important to kind of get going on the spiritual path than to safeguard our ego. So our ego sometimes may not want to see the bad qualities because we feel bad about it, but actually we need to uncover some of those treasures within. Because every time we see a flaw, it is like uncovering a treasure. It allows us to move on the path as a consequence. So we cultivate those perceptions that lead to skillful qualities, lead to more good qualities. Everything we do is geared towards that, leading to more skillful qualities. So, and what way of acquiring perception causes unskillful qualities to grow while skillful qualities decline? It is when someone is covetous. Covetous basically means greedy, right? You're greedy, especially you want other people's things, and lives with a perception full of covetousness. You want stuff. They are malicious, or they have ill will, and they live with a perception full of ill will. They are hurtful, and live with a perception intent on harm. That way of acquiring perception causes unskillful qualities to grow, while skillful qualities decline. So this already, here we're starting now to come down to the more practical things, more specific kind of perceptions. And the more specific it is, the more easy it is to relate to. But it may also mean that things are missed out, perhaps, when you get very specific. So again, so this is really about greed, ill will, and harmfulness. The last one is 𝐕𝐢𝐝𝑠𝑎, which is like this idea of not being compassionate, being harmful to living beings. These are the bad perceptions and the things that we should overcome. So, that is very, very useful. It shows you straight away that ill will is bad. And metta, the opposite of ill will, is very good. Friendliness is really, really useful. Harmfulness is bad, or hurtfulness is bad. But the opposite, which is compassion, is good. It tells you straight away two very important areas where we need to develop our perceptions. Of course, you know this already, but it's kind of very useful. The last one is covetousness, is the idea of amassing stuff for yourself. Very closely related to the idea of greed. So we don't want to be greedy, and we want to kind of give things and be more, less kind of, more content with our life, more satisfied with the way things are. And also part of that, of course, is the idea of generosity. So now we're getting closer to some useful ideas of what we need to develop. And what way of acquiring perception causes unskillful qualities to decline while skillful qualities grow? It is when someone is content and lives with a perception full of contentment. They have goodwill and live with a perception full of goodwill. They are kind and live with a perception full of kindness. That way of acquiring perception causes unskillful qualities to decline, while skillful qualities grow. I say that there are two ways of acquiring perception, that which you should cultivate and that which you should not cultivate. And each of these is a way of acquiring perception. That's what the Buddha said, and this is why he said it. So now let me just quickly look up some of the Pali vocabulary here. I'm not organized quite as well as maybe I should be, or maybe I should not be. Maybe that is sure. Is it good to be always super organized, or is it good to be a bit random sometimes? I don't know. I believe in a bit of randomness myself to be. So let's see if we can find the idea of perception here. This is the wrong sutta. I wonder if I can't find it. Okay. So here you go. It's really nice to have Sutta Central right there. It's really handy there. So perception of contentment is anavijja. So avijja is covetousness or desire. Anavijja is non-desire. That's quite literally what it means. So it's not the usual word for contentment in Pali, which is santuti. It's rather just the lack of desire, which is a non-desire, basically. Avihesa is the idea of harming somebody or not being considerate. Being considered, being like ruthless is the opposite of being ruthless, which is compassion. You know that the word Ruth means compassion? Are you aware of that? No, didn't know that. So Ruth is a name in English, right? Do you have people in Singapore called Ruth? Yeah, okay, so it means compassion in English. It's kind of a really nice name. It's like when people these days, they take Pali names, they call Karuna or whatever it is. And Ruth is actually one of these names. So Ruth means you have compassion. Ruthless means you have no compassion for people. So this word here, really, the Pali word here, vihesa, really ruthlessness is a beautiful way of translating that. So what is the opposite of ruthlessness? Ruthfulness. Yeah. And actually, what is interesting is that the idea of ruthfulness actually was a word. If you go back in England 200 years ago, they had the word ruthfulness. So if you want to be, maybe we should kind of reinstate the word ruthful. What do you think? Yeah, someone has to do it, right? So reinstate the word truthful. So we go around saying truthful, and people say, what are you talking about? And then you explain, and then suddenly we have this beautiful word, truthful, again, that we can use. So truthfulness is a good perception to have. Anyway, I'm getting a bit carried away as usual. Yeah, so I think this is a good place to start, because now we have looked at a large number of suttas, but they're all kind of a little bit background suttas. These are suttas will kind of set the scene, and then we can get into the proper development of individual perceptions as we have set the scene. There's a little bit more scene setting to be done, but we are getting into the actual cultivation of the perceptions very soon. So that is it for now. So please carry on and enjoy yourself, do whatever you want to do. Do not do what you don't want to do, except if it's bad. In that case, you should be doing it. Otherwise, you can do it. And we'll see you back again at 7:30 this evening. Yeah.